In the Avinu Malkeinu prayer, one of the central verses is a plea to God. We say, Avinu Malkeinu, Kotvenu b'Sefer Chaim Tovim. God, please write us into the book of life. But if you know a little bit of Hebrew, you know that letters are not vowels. And so the vowels can be changed, and they can be changed in an interesting way. In this case, if we change the word kotvenu to say rather katavnu. Kotvenu means God, please write us. Katavnu means we have written. And so the question I always ask each year is for us to ask ourselves the question, not as a plea to God, but rather as a question. Katavnu b'Sefer Chaim Tovim, have we written? Have I written myself into the book of life? And there are many possible answers to that question. And then the follow-up, which is, how do we do so? So throughout the history of CSK, I've invited different people to come up and share with us their answer to the question, what does it mean to write myself into the book of life? In 2014, Kevin Cotter faced a life-altering challenge when he was diagnosed with major depression following a hospitalization for suicidal ideation with a plan. This diagnosis opened his eyes to the possibility of treatment and recovery, a journey he now shares with others. Kevin authored the upcoming book, The Power of Intentional Choices, to help bring hope and understanding to those facing similar struggles. He is also a dedicated speaker and state trainer for NAMI's In Our Own Voice program, where he educates and inspires through his personal story. In his professional life, Kevin has been the director of business development of a local ambulance company since 2015. Additionally, he is an active and proud member of Texas EquiSearch. I'd like to invite up my friend, Kevin Cotter, to share with us his thoughts. No words? Okay.
I can't believe I'm going to say this out loud, but I've decided to kill myself. And I thought maybe I should talk to somebody before I go through with my plan. So that was how I began the phone call on April 15, 2014. It was a phone call that changed my life, that really put me on the path to thriving. It was really when I began to learn how to write my own name in the book of life in big, bold, permanent letters. I was in the process of throwing away all my stuff. I didn't see any reason why my wife should have to go through my high school yearbooks and get rid of them after my death. I thought that was the kindest thing I could do. In the midst of going through this stuff that only had sentimental value to me, I found a card that she had given me when we were first together. And for the first time in a long time, I began to ask myself if I was thinking straight. And that was a really strange position to be in, because I'm pretty smart. I'm really creative. I depended on my brain to do anything in life. And to have that moment where I didn't think I was thinking straight was a strange place to be. But who do you talk to when you've made that decision to kill yourself? And what the hell do you say? Like the rabbi said, I'm very fortunate to be part of a local search and rescue team called Texas EquiSearch. And our director of operations at the time was a man named Frank Black. He was a retired HPD officer. And I figured, you know what, if anybody's gonna know who I should talk to, it's Frank. And so I pulled up my phone and I scrolled down to his name and I pushed dial. And he answered. And I said, I can't believe I'm going to say this out loud, but I've decided to kill myself. And I thought, maybe I should talk to somebody. And it wasn't only amazing in a stroke of luck that Frank picked up the phone, but he didn't diminish what I was saying. He didn't say, you're going to be okay. He said, why don't we get together and talk about it? I said, okay. So we actually met not too far from here. And we're talking for a little bit, and he said, I got a friend I think you can talk to. Let me go back to my truck and call him and see what we can do. I said, okay. And a couple minutes later, he walked back to my truck and he said, I've called 911 and they're going to come get you and get you some help. And I said, okay, if that's what you think we should do. That was my introduction to the mental health system. And while I never would have envisioned that I would have spent a week in a mental hospital, if I did, I certainly wouldn't have envisioned I would have told anybody. But I really consider that the best week of my life. That's when the enemy within me was identified. That second day in the hospital, the doctor told me, what you have is called depression and it's treatable. And I said, oh, okay, well, let's do that. That's better. Because it wasn't that I ever really wanted to die. I just couldn't take the pain anymore. The pain had got too much. I couldn't face another day of it. And I'm really glad to say that I don't live in pain anymore. I am thriving now. And what I learned, that my definition has kind of evolved into what mental illness is, or at least depression. It's a chemical imbalance in our brain, but it's also backed up by our behaviors, our thought patterns, and our responses to our emotional stimuli. Now, we can address every single one of those. Medication and exercise can really do wonders for that internal body chemistry. We can start to identify those thought patterns that tell us that we aren't worthy, that we aren't enough, that we're a burden to our family. All that stuff that goes on in our head, that negative internal dialogue. We can begin to address those. We can address our behaviors, because a lot of people, when they have a diagnosis of depression, will take the pill to try to get better. And they're surprised why they don't get better. In fact, 50% of us don't make a significant recovery. And to realize how big a number that is, there's 25 million Americans with major depression. If you stood us shoulder to shoulder, we'd go from San Francisco to Washington, D.C., back to San Francisco to the Mississippi River. So there's a whole lot of us. It's about 1 in 13 Americans. So there's a number of us in this room that are going through this silent pain of depression. And where it tends to stop is by taking the medication. But taking the medication can only alter our body chemistry. It doesn't alter what we're thinking about ourselves. It doesn't alter those behaviors that we think keep us safe, but really just compound the problem. It doesn't affect how we react to our emotions. And to write our name in the book of life, we have to make the intentional choices to begin to work on those, to begin identifying what we're thinking inside. And one of the wisest things I've ever heard in my life came in about my 5th week of treatment. I was at a clinic called West Oaks here in Houston. It was an outpatient program, and the director of the program said, "What would you do if somebody talked to your wife or your children the way you talk to yourself in your head?" And I sat there and I'm like, oh my God. I'd never considered that. I'd never considered that the stuff that went on in my head that I had any control over. I thought I took the stuff that I would think of as facts. Turns out it's not. It's just noise. The next day, I found myself driving to class, and I hit a bump in the road or a pothole in the road because, Houston is filled with potholes and trucks, and I had both right there. And the truck squeaked, and somebody walking on the side of the road gave me a look, and I felt that look was God judging me at that moment. And in about 0.5 seconds, I went from having a pretty good day to feeling like the worst human being on the planet. It was a shame spiral of massive proportions. And in that moment, I thought about what Quincy, the clinic director, had told me the day before. What would you do if somebody talked to yourself or talk to your loved ones the way you talk to yourself in your head? And so at that moment, I decided to respond like an Irish guy would respond, and I began to fight back. I'm driving down the road using every profane word I could think of to talk to that voice in my head, to tell it I'm done with it. That's not what I said, but. And then I got all tingly. The thought went away. And I was like, oh my God, that worked. That worked. I began referring to that as aggressive language interruption. I thought I had made this major discovery. It turns out that it's a cognitive behavioral therapy process called thought interruption. But, I've always had a pretty good ego. But it's identifying those thoughts in real time and beginning to interrupt them. And it was one of those major breakthroughs for me that allowed me to begin to rebuild that life, to begin to rebuild who I was and become me for the first time in forever. And even with everything I've been able to do for myself, there have been friends I haven't been able to save. We lost a member of our congregation 6 months ago to suicide, and he was a friend of mine. And I am still upset with him. I am still angry because he didn't make that call to me. What I've realized, though, is that we can't always make the call, but I want you to hear that the pain that you feel inside that's dictating every decision that you make in your life right now doesn't have to be a permanent state. You can make the call. You can call your friend. You can call 911. If you've decided that you want to remove yourself from the book of life, ask somebody for help. There's many resources out there. And if you don't know who to talk to, call the rabbi. He can give you my number. I'm happy to talk to you. Because it is possible to thrive, and it is possible to write your name in that book of life in big, bold, permanent letters. Thank you.